Hey, everybody. Sometimes this world is a difficult place, full of division and distraction. Wouldn't it be great if there was just one thing we could remember above all other things to do to help us navigate it successfully? Well, one of Jesus' really close friends, Peter, believed there was one thing. And we're going to share in this first of a three-part message series what it was that Peter believed we could do above all things to successfully navigate this difficult world. So what we're going to do is first dive into the word. Then we'll look at the story of the man who shared these words. Peter was inspired to write two letters to the early church. And we're going to the first of his letters found in 1 Peter, and we'll go to chapter 4 and pick it up there from verse 7. The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind, so that you may pray. The early church to whom he was writing were persecuted for being followers of the way, followers of the heretical rabbi from Galilee, and so they were persecuted by their own religious leaders, in addition to the persecution they were already suffering from the occupying Romans. Paul stresses how fragile life is, and he reminds them to stay alert and be sober-minded and devote themselves to prayer. But it's in the next verse, verse 8, that Peter tells them what their priority should be. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. We're going to spend the next 3 weeks immersing ourselves in this verse, looking first at the priority of love, then at the importance of loving deeply, and finally on the third Sabbath, when we'll also celebrate communion, we can look how love covers over a multitude of sins. One way to remember the three important parts in this verse is to look at it as a priority. Love first, love fiercely, and love freely. Make love a priority. Let's dive in to the original language and a deeper understanding of what love Peter is talking about. Peter draws their attention by saying, above all, love. In the original language, the Greek word pro is used. Pro is a prefix. It means before anything. This must be first. For all, we find the Greek word pas, which means everything and anything. So Peter is saying the first thing, before anything and everything, love. And the word used for love is agape. Agape love is the highest form of love. C.S. Lewis describes agape love like this. It's a selfless love that is passionately committed to the well-being of others. The disciple was probably Jesus' closest friend, and this is how he describes love. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Do you see the same elements that C.S. Lewis noted? Love doesn't start with us, it starts with God. And it's other-centered. God made the greatest sacrifice by sending his Son to reconcile us to him. Finally, in our definition of love, let's listen to how Paul was inspired to describe it. Paul, while not one of the original disciples of Jesus, spent time with Jesus after meeting him in a spectacular way when Jesus completely turned Paul around 180 degrees in his outlook on life. Paul describes love like this. This love of which I speak is slow to lose patience. It looks for a way of being constructive. It is not possessive. It is neither anxious to impress, nor does it cherish inflated ideas of its own importance. It has good manners, and does not pursue selfish advantage. It is not touchy. It does not keep account of evil or gloat over the wickedness of other people. 3. It is glad with all good men when truth prevails. Love knows no limit to its endurance, no end to its trust, no fading of its hope. It can outlast anything. It is, in fact, the one thing that still stands when all else has fallen. Now we pivot back to the story of how Peter came to the place where he writes, above all, love one another deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Peter, as a fisherman, full of professional pride, hard-working. One sunny day, on the beach, he's cleaning his nets, aware of a large crowd of people listening to the teacher. Suddenly, the teacher is standing next to him. Peter, there's too many people. They can't see me properly or hear what I'm saying. Since you're not using it at the moment, can I stand in your boat, push me out a little way, and then more people will be able to see and hear what I have to say. And so Peter allows Jesus to use his boat and probably listens intently, even while he pretends just to be cleaning his net, while Jesus teaches the people. When Jesus finishes his teaching, he says to Peter, bring your nets, jump back in the boat and let's go fishing. Peter knows better. He has fished all night. His nets are now clean, ready for the next night's fishing. Who ever heard of catching a huge fish haul so close to the shore and in the middle of the day? But something inside him makes him agree to Jesus' suggestion. No sooner are the nets submerged under the water when they are full of fish. Peter and his brother Andrew desperately try to pull the nets in. They shout to their partners on the beach, James and John, come and help us. This one boat will sink. Once the catch is safely on board, the reality of what's just happened hits Peter. He falls to his knees in front of Jesus and says, please go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. With a smile in his voice, Jesus invites Peter, Andrew, his brother, and James and John to expand their profession, to move from just being fishermen to being fishers of men. This is Peter's first lesson. Jesus taught him not to let sin, not to let fish or the worry over finances or even fear be first. Jesus called him to love first. Vignette in Peter's life. After a long day, Jesus tells his friends to take their boat and cross over the Sea of Galilee while he spends time in prayer with his Father. They set off, and halfway across, a massive storm hits, and they're worried about how well their boat will fare. In the middle of battling the storm, they look up and see a figure approaching them on top of the water. It's Jesus. Peter, ever impulsive, says, if it's really you, Jesus, call me to come to you. Jesus says, come. Peter steps out of the boat, takes a few steps on the water. However, He's soon distracted by the wind and the waves, and he begins to sink. Just as he's about to drown, he cries out to Jesus. Jesus reaches out his hand and helps Peter up and into the boat. Peter learns, and we can learn with him. Don't wait for absolute proof. Don't demand miracles. Trust. I'm not saying to suspend critical thinking. I'm not saying to have blind faith. I am saying, don't wait, but answer the call to love first. Snapshot number 3. Jesus is spending time with Peter and the other disciples. His reputation has started spreading, and Jesus asks them, "Who do people say I am?" Some of the disciples say, "People say you're a prophet, Jesus." Some maybe even think you're Elijah. And then Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Who do you say I am?" Peter, inspired straight from heaven, boldly declares, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus commends Peter and proclaims that on this confession, he will build his church. But then Jesus starts to talk about his suffering. How when they get to Jerusalem, he will be arrested, tried on trumped up charges, beaten, and then crucified on a cross. This is too much for Peter. This doesn't fit with his view of what's going to happen. And he calls Jesus aside and reprimands him and says, "Don't talk like this. This will never happen to you." Jesus says to him, "Peter, you are saying evil things. I must suffer." Jesus' harsh reprimand to Peter teaches him that it's not about my priorities. It's not about empty words. It's about love, and love first. Not very long after, Jesus and his disciples have gathered together to celebrate the Passover meal. Jesus predicts the events that will unfold in the following hours and days. He predicts that Peter will deny him. Peter takes offense. "I will never deny you, Jesus. Even though everybody else deserts you, I will stay with you." Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Peter, Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat." Jesus is using a very graphic example that they all would have been aware of. Large sieves were used to sift the dirt and sticks and stones out of the wheat. After shaking the sieve vigorously and the wheat kernels falling through, all that would remain would be the dirt and the stones and the sticks. And Jesus is saying, Satan's going to shake you so that the ugliest parts of your character come to the surface. But then Jesus doesn't stop there. He says, "After you've denied me and repented, strengthen your brothers." And as the events of the next few hours unfold, Jesus is arrested. He is taken and put on trial. Peter follows at a safe distance, and when he's confronted with being one of Jesus' friends, he denies it, not once, not twice, but 3 times. After the 3rd time that he's denied even knowing his friend in his greatest hour of need, Jesus turns and looks at Peter. As their eyes meet, something breaks inside Peter. He rushes out into the night, weeping bitterly. He's coming to realize that in the kingdom Jesus is establishing, it's not about safety first. It's about love first. Jesus and Peter, one last time. Jesus has indeed died on the cross. But 3 days later, he has risen again. And now we find him on the beach, having made a fire and cooking breakfast for his friends. As the smell of fried fish fills everyone's nostrils, Jesus looks across at Peter. Their eyes meet, and Peter immediately drops his gaze. The memory of his betrayal is still so strong. Jesus keeps his eyes on Peter and asks in a gentle voice, "Peter, do you love me?" Jesus asks, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And each time Peter responds, "Lord, you know I love you." And each time Jesus responds, "Feed my sheep," calling Peter to the role of shepherd for the early church, asking him to help in founding that early Christian community. So Peter learns that it's not failure first. Jesus looks past our faults and weaknesses. He simply says to us, love first, and I can overcome any failure or fault that exists in you. We see from the life of Peter that it's not fear first or failure first or finances first. It's not safety first. It's love first. And having this message become fully part of him, Peter writes, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And so Peter learns, above all, to love first. And he calls us to do the same. As part of the community, the followers of the way, we are called, above all, to love first. We can only do this through Jesus. So, unto him who can keep us, make us blameless in his presence, unto Jesus, unto the only God, unto him who has saved us, be all glory, be all majesty. Amen.